EM Weekly is starting right now.
That's kind of how I found my passion for weather and for what I do, is by combining weather and my experience as on local emergency management, and fuse those together.
Hey, and welcome to EM Weekly, and this is your host, Todd DeVoe, here with you for this really cool topic that we're going to be talking about, weather. So it's kind of an apropos time to talk about weather, because today in Southern California, it's raining out. I'm sitting here in my studio looking out and looking at the rain. It's beautiful. I love the rain. In the Northeast, it's getting walloped with a nor'easter. I'm from New York originally, and so I do prefer the rainy days and the nice weather like this compared to the crazy snowstorms that occur back there. But my friends and family are sharing those pictures with me on Facebook, and it's amazing to see the winter wonderland that's occurring right here in March. So March is definitely going out like a lion. We are a week closer to announcing some cool new features on EM Weekly, and I wish I could announce them now. Brian is working really hard on this, and he listens, and so I don't want to take away from what he's doing over there, because there's still some things that he's working on the back end, and we're really close to announcing what we're doing over there. Some of you, I've given some sneak peeks into it, so let me know what you guys think about those who were able to take the sneak peek in. Some of you the guys that are on the Facebook group got to see it too. So I'm really excited about this coming up, and man, I just wish I could tell more, but I can't, so I won't, and I don't want Brian to be all mad at me. He's my buddy, and I like to keep it that way. In the Ask Todd inbox, I received a question about EOC communication tools, such as like WebEOC or those type of things. And the question specifically was about Slack or those type of project management tools that they have out there. And Slack was the one that was mentioned, so that's why I mentioned Slack. And can you use that in the EOC as a communications tool with the their current tool that they're using? I believe it was WebEOC. So my short answer is, sure, you can. But you want to streamline your tools that you're logging into, and it reduces that training line that you have regarding logging into things, what they can be used for under stressful situations. Do you want to add that additional step in there? If your tool that you're currently using doesn't work the way you want it, and especially with like WebEOC, ask them and see if they will develop something along that lines. They might be even working on something like that right now, because they're always developing new boards and whatnot. I know the companies really are. Well, most of them are really receptive and looking to improve the quality of their product. So ask them and tell them this is what your need is, and see if they can develop it. If they can't or won't, maybe it's time to look for a new tool. Look for a better company that's willing to work with you. Take a look at Slack. And this is kind of a cool project management tool. Lots of features that are on there. I don't use it personally. Never really played with it. I was talking to a few friends about it. It does have some capabilities, and if that's something that you want to do, it's not a bad one to choose. But like I was saying before, you don't want to increase the number of logins and whatnot that you're going to have in the middle of an emergency, especially with people that are coming up to your EOC that don't use it on a daily basis. And so adding that additional step can sometimes be confusing. You might miss communications that way. And you just really want to streamline that communications process for everybody involved in the event. I know that was a short answer, but again, it comes to tools like this, our personal preference and what your agency likes to work with. And so ask this one question when choosing that tool is, can it do what I need it to do at the time I want it to do it? And if you can answer yes to that with 90% of an accuracy on it, I would say stick with that. So that's kind of where we're at with that question. So thank you so much. So if you do have any EM-related questions, click on the Ask Todd tab at the EM Weekly website, www.emweekly.com. If I don't know what the answer is, I will find out, and I'll find the person who does. So also, speaking of that, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And on Facebook, you can also join our group page, and there you can interact with other emergency management professionals, and you can ask questions over there and share stories and share your best practices and what's going on. And it's a really fun place to kind of do that and get to be with everybody else in the emergency management EM Weekly community. I'm really excited today. I am going to talk about weather with an actual meteorologist named Kyle Nelson. And Kyle and I actually met at the 2017 International Association of Emergency Managers Conference in Long Beach, and we started chit-chatting about weather. And I have to admit, I am a weather geek. I have a weather station at my house. The guys, some of my friends and I, We do a competition when we're going to get rain, whenever that happens, in Orange County, and we challenge each other to see if we can guess how much it's going to rain during that storm period. And we're only allowed to look at the weather stations once. So that's how the game is played. And I'm an admitted weather geek. So when I met Kyle and we started chit-chatting, I said, I got to get you on the show because he is independent meteorologist. And what is that? Well, we're going to find out. So Kyle, welcome to EM Weekly.
Hey, Todd, thanks for having me on the show. Great to meet another weather geek.
So, Kyle, what exactly is an independent meteorologist?
Oh, man. Well, I like to define independent meteorologist as, someone who is more than just a meteorologist, because going through the academia and the classroom side of it, well, that's all well and good. But on the independent side, I like the flexibility that brings. I choose to apply myself in the public safety and emergency management realms. So doing weather decision support for pre-planned events and emerging incidents, as well as doing forecasting for fixed sites and facilities like where I work out in Colorado. So it's really can't place one definition on it, but it definitely, I think, gives you the flexibility to ebb and flow and kind of chase your dreams.
That's really kind of cool. So, I mean, are you sort of like a quasi storm chaser type person, or is it a little bit more in depth than that?
Well, it can definitely get more depth than that. I'm not much of a storm chaser myself. When I was growing up in the Midwest, I was kind of into storm spotting at the local level through our local Skywarp Weather Spotter program. I'm a huge advocate of that. So if you haven't checked out your local Skywarp Spotter program, those are coming out here in the spring. Look for your local National Weather Service on their website and get trained up. And that's kind of how I found my passion for weather and for what I do is by combining weather and my experience as on local emergency management and fuse those together. And now it's still the meteorology side, all the science and the forecasting and that. It's still all there in what I do, and the fundamentals are still the same, but it's how I choose to apply that knowledge and communicate it is to a different audience in a little bit of a different format.
So as emergency managers, and I know we all care about weather, so the question is going to be a little jaded here, but why should we care about weather? Why should it be important for us to have a meteorologist in the Emergency Operations Center if we can get one?
Oh, that's a great question, Todd. So why should you care about weather, right? Well, that's one, it's easy if we, some of us live in places where the weather doesn't change much, or you don't have the big extremes like some certain places in the Southwest, for example, where it's, hot and sunny seemingly every day. And then the occasional passing shower, turns traffic to chaos. So that might be one reason to care about weather. And kind of what I throw out when I posed that question is, weather affects your day-to-day operations, whether you realize it or not, because even something as benign as, a passing rain shower or, a thunderstorm, any one of these events that you seemingly kind of are lulled into a sense of, oh, we got this, we've seen this before, we've dealt with it before, at the local level, all the way to our high impact events like severe weather, tornadoes, hurricanes, flash flooding, and things that we plan for as emergency managers. Weather affects our operations and it affects our planning. So if we can better understand it, or even better, have someone, it's like a meteorologist, a true degreed meteorologist who's trained also in emergency management and communication in your EOC or Emergency Operations Center, that is an invaluable relationship to have, because that way you can have the folks with the local expertise, local training, and local knowledge informing your operations, keeping the folks in the field safe, and allowing your planning section to plan ahead to the next operational period if you're in a situation like that, where you can then plan around any weather hazards that may be forecast to occur.
So yeah, I really understand that. It's really kind of cool. So, so you're telling me that the weather guy doesn't just take a dartboard with a picture of clouds on it and throws random darts to make his forecast?
No, nor do we really rely on the groundhog method either, but that's neither here nor there. It's soundly based in science, Todd. It may not seem like it at times, the old adage, you weather folks can, you're the only ones who can do your job wrong 50% of the time and still get paid. I kind of laugh at that and look at it as job security. So it all depends on your perspective, I guess.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. So I know that, in Southern California specifically where I operate, and I kind of tend to come from that as my launch off point, is we really use a lot of weather forecasting when it comes to our fire weather. Obviously people around here, we get the red flag warnings with the winds coming in, and we're worried about the Santa Anas coming out of the desert to push fires around. And we saw some of those issues, right, this year in California, not just Southern California, but Northern California and Santa Rosa and Central California with the Santa Barbara fires, Thomas Fire specifically. What's the difference between normal forecasting and say fire forecasting?
I can't really say that there's a difference between the two, because as part of the normal forecast, we're considering as meteorologists all the, not just the immediate weather hazards, but the effects that can cascade from them. And with regard to fire weather specifically, that's where we have experts at the Storm Prediction Center located in Norman, Oklahoma, that are not just looking at doing severe weather forecasting, but also fire weather forecasting, since especially for us in the Southwest and the Western mountains here in the United States, our fire weather often revolves around thunderstorm activity. Specifically dry thunderstorms. So starting from a lightning strike and things like that. And so that's something where as forecasters, that's a highly specialized skill set that's trained and developed over time. And you're looking at very specific criteria and things, not just to include what's happening in the atmosphere, but what's happening at the ground level as well. Like I know here in Colorado, if things don't change pretty soon, for this year, here in 2018, we're looking at a pretty active start to the wildfire season being predicted due to, we have a very shallow snowpack that's going to disappear quickly. So you have low fuel moisture in addition to, sloping terrain and, high winds that can kick up around here in addition to as we warm up, especially into the spring and summertime, dry weather conditions, so low dew points and low relative humidities that ultimately all combine together to generate what we call fire weather.
Right. Yeah, this is going to be a pretty intense time in our climate today, huh? With the fire weather. Let's talk a little bit about climate change. And I want to just kind of go on a limb here to everybody that I'm not politically talking about climate change, whether you believe it's man-made or whether you believe it's cyclical or whatever the situation is. I think we can all agree that we're in some sort of shift in what the climate was to where it's going. It's been warmer, rain has been less. How is that affecting our ability to predict whether things like the El Niños and the El Niñas and those type of things?
So climate change isn't affecting our ability to predict the natural variations that occur in our atmosphere. If anything, we're actually getting better at observing them and predicting them on a longer term basis. So things like you mentioned, so El Nino or La Nina, a warming or cooling of surface ocean waters in the central Pacific, respectively. This year we find ourselves, or this season I should say, we find ourselves in a La Nina situation with cooler than normal surface temperatures in the Pacific. And those natural cycles in Earth's atmosphere, those are known to be occurring. But it's when we start to consider the human influences on our atmosphere and on our globe, our Earth, the place that we call home, and how through human activities we are modifying our climate and, as we say, shifting our extremes. And so we're seeing more of these extremes, and it's hard to for folks sometimes to say, and I'm not coming at it from a political side either, but more of a factual scientific side in what we've observed, where if you and I like to kind of put it in context here, where think about you're like a bell curve, if you will. So you have your kind of your weather normals, like what you expect on your day-to-day or seasonal basis, like this is the normal for this time of year for your area, and that would be near the center of your bell curve. And then you have the outliers near either end, and those are your extremes. So if we shift that bell curve ever so slightly in a warming climate, as we shift that and say, we're also then in turn shifting how extreme our extremes can get. So it's all about having a matter of perspective. It's not like you're going to automatically within the next year or even 10 years see direct effects perhaps at your specific location, but areas such as coastal regions where we're seeing sea level rise and inundation. Talk to emergency management folks in Florida who are seeing this currently happening, and where they're having to raise streets and buildings and things to mitigate against the observed and further projected effects of global climate change. And we're getting away from that global warming thing because the warming is not equal all over the globe. There are some areas of the globe that are actually cooling, but it's global climate change that we're talking about. And it's undeniable that humans are influencing how our climate is changing here on Earth.
Yeah, I know. It's definitely a hard thing for us to get our grasp around. One of the things that this is an opinion. I haven't done the data, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that we're seeing a lot more building out of areas that used to be able to absorb water when it rained. And Houston's a really good example of it. There was a whole show podcast that was put on by NPR, and they were talking about how areas in Houston that were actually marked as being a floodplain were developed, and there's concrete and there's asphalt all laid throughout this area, and homes were built. And so the area wasn't able to absorb the water that was coming in that probably should have. Is that impacting the weather as well, or is it just impacting the Earth's ability to take on that rain?
So the human modification of, in this example, our surface cover, where we're taking natural areas that used to have natural soils and trees and things like that, and now we're placing these impermeable surfaces where water can't get through. So instead of rain falling, hitting the earth and becoming groundwater and going into the hydrologic system locally, it's instead hitting these surfaces, whether it be the roofs of buildings, whether it be asphalt or concrete parking lots, and then running off as surface water runoff. That is becoming an increased problem. And it's further compounding the effects that we see from a warming climate, which as in air that is warmer, you have more potential to hold more moisture. So as a result, if our climate as a whole is warming, then we are also then able to have our atmosphere hold more water, which then leads to more intense rainfalls and greater rainfalls over areas where perhaps historically they have not occurred. And now you compound that with how humans have been modifying our infrastructure and perhaps not, planning for, how those infrastructures would be kind of impacted by the projected effects of global climate change. That can lead to some problems hyper-locally, as many areas have experienced.
Right. Okay, well, I have a question. I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to ask you a little bit about the weather that was happening during Harvey and the phenomenon that I was reading about and how that exactly worked. So we'll be right back after the short break and some words from our sponsors.
Emergencies happen. Whether they're related to medical emergencies, threats of physical violence, weather-related, or other. One of the most difficult things during an emergency is to find help and quickly and efficiently communicate with all parties, regardless of whether you're an administrator, law enforcement, or the end user. With Titan HST, we help to store time by creating high-tech, yet simple-to-use mobile-based applications that connect you with the people who can help you. At Titan HST, we believe in the power of people.
The modern emergency manager wears a lot of hats, so how do you also fit in the needs of your exercise program? It is a matter of time, and how much is your time worth? A lot. TTX Vault is the answer to getting some of that time back. We offer pre-assembled tabletops, drills, and functional exercises spanning NIMS, hospitals and healthcare, special operations, and more, all coming from the archives of the Blue Cell. Get a jumpstart on the exercise process and visit us today at www.ttxvault.com.
Hi, this is Todd DeVoe from EM Weekly. If your company is in the emergency management and response space, EM Weekly is a place for you to advertise. Each week we bring in experts in emergency management, response, and leadership from around the world, and they're here to share their best practices. Our listeners are eager to learn about new products and ideas, so this is the space for you. For more information, please contact Brian at emweekly.com.
So, Kyle, welcome back from the break. And before I went on the break, I kind of alluded to a question regarding some issues that with Harvey and some of the stuff I read, and also the briefing that I got from the National Weather Service with Alex Tardy. And he was talking about the fact that we had like really, really nasty, gray, humid weather in California when Harvey was going on. And he alluded to the fact that this was part of the reason why Harvey was so strong, because it was sucking water in and that it created a stall. What exactly is that, and how does the stuff like that happen scientifically?
Oh man. So Hurricane Harvey was, it set records on so many levels, and it was in part due to what we as meteorologists call a blocking pattern. And if you recall from when Harvey was setting up and forecasters were predicting these, what at the time were termed insane rainfall amounts, 30, 40, 50 inches or more over the Houston and surrounding areas. It was due to, Hurricane Harvey sitting and just training or persisting over that area for a long amount of time. And that was because to the west of Texas, over the southern Rockies, there was a high pressure system that was in place. And with that setup in place, it didn't allow the winds in the middle part of the atmosphere that steer hurricanes to come in and push Hurricane Harvey to the north or to the east or away from the Houston area, where typically hurricanes, they're here, they're gone, they can travel even sometimes slowly, they still move or have some type of forward motion. In this case, it didn't. And it was because of that blocking pattern that's set up over the western U.S. So it was a kind of a cascade effect that because these systems weren't moving the high pressure to the west, the low pressure that was Hurricane Harvey over the Houston area just locked in place until a very strong jet stream was able to come in and finally kick that system away from the Texas coast.
That's pretty amazing stuff. I mean, like I said, most people just think of the weathers when they turn on the news and they see their local weathermen say, it's going to be sunny and warm, or it's going to be raining, or, make sure you have your umbrella. But there's a lot more to this whole thing called weather that we all have to live with. So in this system here that occurred with Harvey, there's really, at this point, there's absolutely nothing that we can do until the weather decides to make a change, and people just kind of have to be prepared and to live with that. Now, is that caused in part by the climate change, or is that just one of those things that just happen to happen?
Well, we cannot yet attribute any specific or any one event, whether it be local or a very, very widespread event, like a hurricane or a severe thunderstorm or tornado outbreak, to climate change. But climate change is absolutely influencing events, both current and historical. I mean, some of you may recall extreme events such as, Typhoon Haiyan in the Western Pacific back in 2013, the Indian heat wave, which killed, thousands back in 2015, the El Reno tornado in 2013, Hurricane Sandy 2012. The list goes on, but it's events like these and Hurricane Harvey can absolutely be added to the list that are influenced by Earth's changing climate. And one of the effects that we are seeing globally is with the warming atmosphere due to emissions of greenhouse gases, amplifying the greenhouse effect on a global scale. In a warmer atmosphere, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. That more moisture is one of the ingredients that helps to fuel these tropical systems, including hurricanes like Hurricane Harvey. And with a warmer atmosphere that can hold more moisture, that can ultimately lead to heavier rainfall events over more hyper-local areas. And so Hurricane Harvey absolutely was indeed influenced by climate change, but it's the reason that it sat in one place and the reason that it behaved the way that it did. We cannot yet tie changes on the global climate scale to those little minute things that ultimately resulted in a catastrophic event for Houston and the surrounding area.
So one of the misnomers that we always hear about, especially, because before it was even called global warming and now we're at climate change, that it's going to be warming, and because it's warming, everything's going to be just hotter, right? And then when we see these massive snowstorms that hit the Northeast last year, like the Boston snow blizzard that occurred, and those northeasterns that are always occurring, that doesn't necessarily rule that cold, snowy events out, right?
Todd, that's one of my favorite questions. So with, does one snowfall event or one extreme weather event, does that disprove climate change or this idea that, the Earth's climate is warming as a whole? And the answer is simply no. There was a famous case where you had a congressman on television who he brought a snowball to the floor of Congress, and he said, because it is snowing outside, there is no way that Earth's climate can be warming, because if it was warming, there's no way I'd have this snowball from snow that's occurring outside. It's little events like this. People like to cherry pick them, and it's important, I think, to, at this point, create and to identify the difference between weather and climate. So climate is an average of weather events over the long term. So we're talking 30 years or more, where weather is what's happening right now outside your window, that your weather station is measuring, that your app is telling you how, what the temperature is, the wind speed, the direction, and things like that. All those variables define what the weather is, what is actually occurring, where climate is a long-term average of those conditions. And so, overall, over the Earth, the average global temperature is increasing, due to, human effects. And so because of that, we're not seeing all those warming effects everywhere. Some areas of the globe are actually cooling, even though Earth's atmosphere as a whole is warming. So it's important then to also think about this. And I like to throw out a couple of analogies where, weather is your mood and climate is your personality, where, your mood can change and swing wildly throughout the day. Those of us with significant others know this. Right. So, where personality, it's defined. That's an average over the very long term, what defines you and your personality. So you can think of Earth the same way, where you have these weather extremes that can occur and the weather that occurs day to day. But then in the background, influencing all of that is that background climate or personality, if you will.
Right. So one of the programs that the National Weather Service has is the Storm Ready program. And I actually went through that program and a few times. It's a pretty cool program. They come and take a look at your plan, and they see if you're addressing weather concerns based upon your area and your plan. So it's a really actually good plan check, if you want to think of it that way, where the National Service checks off on your plan. But the cool part about this is that you're thinking about weather events. And as emergency managers, that's one of those things that we really need to consistently think about. How does the weather affect how we're going to be able to evacuate? How does the weather affect how the fire burns for us? How does the weather affect our planning in the future? And to think about that through the plan. Now, that being said, with the way things are going on right now, what can we do as emergency managers to keep that in our plan throughout it? And what can we do about that?
So moving forward as a emergency management community, as we said from the beginning, weather affects our operations day to day, for our normal routine operations, as well as for special events and things that may come up unexpectedly as well in our communities. And one of the programs to ensure that that's being done, especially at the local level, is the Storm Ready program that you mentioned, Todd. And I can't say enough about the program. I'm a huge advocate of it. I'm a Storm Ready supporter myself through a few of the consulting gigs that I work through. And it's really, really awesome to be able to, really kind of take some of the concepts from the Storm Ready program. And some folks, it is, I admit, some can say, oh my gosh, it's another application, another thing we have to go through. I just went through EMAP accreditation. Now I have to go through the Storm Ready thing, all these pushbacks to it. But I'll tell you right now that I've never seen an 8-page federal application before in my life. That's 8 pages. And so just to kind of highlight just some of the benefits of it and how we can use the tenets of the Storm Ready program to keep ourselves with a weather-ready mindset going forward throughout the year, is thinking about, communications and your ability to monitor weather, 24/7 within your community, as well as having a way to amplify or to disseminate weather information and warnings. If you already have a system in place for that, whether it's your 911 dispatch or public safety answering point doing the monitoring, whether you have a duty officer in your emergency operations center on a 24/7 basis, however that process works, that's one of the boxes that you can check off on that application to keep your mindset in a weather ready mode. Now you look at, okay, how am I receiving information from the National Weather Service? With all the weather hazards that could affect my area, how can I get notified if one of those weather hazards is either in the forecast, if it's has the potential to occur, say we're in the watch phase, so we have the potential for hazardous weather to occur in or near our area, or if it is actually occurring. So if the threat is imminent, so we have a warning, or if it's a nuisance condition, so we might be in the advisory status of things. How are we receiving that information with our agency so that we can keep ourselves, our staff, and our communities safe and informed? How do we monitor weather locally? And also then, how do we push that information? If it's, say, a watch or a warning, how do we disseminate that to our partners in our area of responsibility, in our community? So it's things like this that we're thinking about so that we can keep ourselves in a weather-ready track, and we're doing this year-round because weather doesn't take a day off. And while we do have seasons that we like to, you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes. You have seasons that, right, for hazardous weather, like, on the Great Plains, there's tornado season, and then there's, we have hurricane season that's defined by these hard and fast dates. But as we saw back in 2017, we had tropical systems beginning to occur well before the start of the official Atlantic hurricane season as it is defined. So just keeping in mind that if conditions become favorable, these weather hazards can occur any time of year. So keeping yourself on your toes and going through a program like Storm Ready, it's also a great badge of honor you can wear and also promote within your community. And it's also a really neat thing to show your boss and be like, hey, boss, this is really cool. Look, let's get some good PR out of this, and let's help carry this organization forward.
Right. It's true. That is awesome. Yeah, we get a lot of pictures taken, all that kind of stuff, so it's a lot of fun. So piggyback on the Storm Ready program, and you mentioned earlier the Skywarp Program. Can you talk a little bit about the Skywarp Program, what that is, and why we should support that as emergency managers?
Oh, absolutely. The Skywarp Program is a program that is championed by the National Weather Service at the local level. So your local National Weather Service office, and if you don't know who that is or who your local office is, just go to weather.gov. That's weather.gov. That is different from weather.com, for those of you that are wondering. So weather.gov, put in your zip code there in the search box in the upper left, and then you'll be taken to your local weather service office's forecast page. Connect with your warning coordination meteorologist, or WCM, at that office, and they are your point of contact as a local emergency manager. First and foremost, that should be your step. If you don't, as an emergency manager, have your local warning coordination meteorologist, their number programmed in your phone and posted by the duty officer's desk in your emergency operations center or watch center, get on that. So seriously, it's an invaluable relationship to have. They are also your local point of contact for the Skywarp program that's offered in your area. And the Skywarp program is offered by your local weather service office, and it's typically 1 to 2 hours tops that trains folks from at all levels, from community volunteers, community organizations, as well as you, your staff, your leadership, from public safety to emergency management and on up from there, how to observe and identify hazardous weather in your area. So it's very tailored, it's very hyper-local, and it highlights examples from historic weather that has occurred in your area of responsibility before. And what this empowers you to do is to have a greater network of local information in your area. Because with all of the technology and the automated systems that we have nowadays, think about how difficult it can be sometimes just to get weather conditions on a normal blue sky day, and as to what the temperature is or what the wind speed and direction is. If, say, you have a hazmat incident, right? You're kind of averaging between two disparate or very distanced apart weather stations, and you're kind of averaging saying, oh, well, the wind should be about this much. Well, now think about that with regard to heavy snowfall, with regard to rainfall, with regard to any type of hazardous weather, even something very hyperlocal like damaging winds or a tornado. If you can build a very dense network of trained individuals that know how to identify and report these things to your local National Weather Service office and to your emergency management office, right there, your operations are better informed and you can appropriately direct response assets to the areas of your community that are being impacted the hardest. So the Skywarp program is incredibly valuable. And the best part, it's my favorite four-letter F word, free. Absolutely, totally free. Partner up. If you're having trouble filling a class by yourself, partner with a neighboring jurisdiction, a neighboring county. Bring that in. Have folks connect with their local meteorologist. You never know if you might have some other weather weenies in your midst.
Yeah, weather weenies. Love them. That's awesome. Yeah, I really support that program too. And for those of you that have like CERT programs or VIPS programs or RACES programs, stuff like that, or other Citizen Core programs, that's a really great, free, fun addition to your teams. And the people who went through the program, they enjoy it and are going to be a really good asset for you. And it gives you the ability to give a nice training to those volunteers at a zero cost for you. You maybe have to buy some coffee and some cookies and stuff like that, but at the most part, it's a free program. So I agree with you right there. Okay, we're coming up to the end here, and I have the hardest question of the day for you. What book or books or publication do you recommend to somebody who is, number one, into emergency management weather, or number two, into general leadership?
Ooh, well, Todd, I got two of them for you, and you'll see how they tie together here. So the first is called Smart Talk by Lisa Marshall. She's a professional speaking coach and public speaker. And when I first found my passion for public speaking and community outreach during grad school, I knew the material, the science of weather and meteorology very well, but I struggled to deliver it effectively in a public setting outside of the scientific community. And so Smart Talk really helped me to hone my public speaking skills. And so that's one that I absolutely recommend. The second book is called 541. Stories from the Joplin Tornado. That's one, it's by Randy Turner and John Hacker. Very highly recommended. As a scientist, and I like to think sometimes as, emergency management types, we can sometimes become engrossed in numbers, definitions, and criteria for things, where there's a human side to weather disasters, and that's not always well communicated. But after the Joplin, Missouri tornado on May 22nd, 2011, killed over 160 people, we knew as a weather and public safety community that something had to change. Triple-digit tornado deaths in 2011 after we thought we had it licked. But you hear from reading 541 the tales of heroism, bravery, human suffering, and perseverance. Me personally, it made a deep impression on me, and I think it would make a deep impression on you all as well. And just it reframes what it means to experience a disaster through a human lens. And it's a very, very valuable perspective that has stuck with me since I read that book. So 541 Stories from the Joplin Tornado.
That's great. And I love books like that. So I'm definitely going to look that one up and get it. So thanks for that recommendation. Kyle, if somebody really wanted to get a hold of you, how could they get a hold of you?
Well, Todd, folks can find me on all the social media platforms under the handle WX Kyle Nelson. So feel free to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, or connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I'd love to connect with any of your amazing listeners and continue the conversation.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say to emergency managers before we let you go?
So to emergency managers, I want to just emphasize that it's easy to place a stigma or a definition on what it is to know a meteorologist or to have one in your EOC, right? They're the weather nerds that sit in the back room and in their ivory tower, they give you the forecast and that's it. But the game is changing. We realize as a weather community that we haven't done the best with communicating weather and climate and these science hazards to you all who are the decision makers charged with keeping communities safe. And so the game has changed. And there's folks like myself and many others, especially in the National Weather Service, that are continuing to redefine what it means to support your decision making when it comes to severe and hazardous weather being forecasted in your area. welcome us into your EOCs, welcome us into your operations. And if the National Weather Service can't do it, there are many other great private companies that can provide the level of support and monitoring that you may need. So leave the technical expertise and interpretation of all the models and the climate and stuff like that to the experts, and focus on the operational side of things, and we'll give you all the information we can to make the best decisions so that you can keep folks safe in the field.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for being here with me tonight, and I do really appreciate everything that you're doing out there. And yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.